You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, biohacking, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere and anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your host, Dr. Justin Marchegiani, as he answers your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio. Feel free and head over to beyondwellnessradio.com where you can access our full podcast transcriptions. While you're there, you can also sign up for our thyroid and female hormone video series. This series goes into the root cause of why your hormones are out of balance. While you're there, you can also schedule a functional medicine consult with Dr. Justin, myself, where we'll dig deeper into the root cause of your health challenges. Feel free and think of sharing this podcast with at least one person. This podcast grows by people sharing it. Sharing is caring. If you can think of one person that can benefit from this information, please feel free and share it. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can also click below the video or podcast where you'll see the iTunes review button and leave us a review. You can also sign up for the newsletter at beyondwellnessradio.com where you'll get updates before anyone else. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. Hey there, it's Dr. Justin. Welcome back to Beyond Wellness Radio. Today I have Michele Rosenthal on, and Michele has just come out with her book, Heal Your PTSD. She is a PTSD or post-stress disorder expert. And again, Michele is an award-winning blogger at PTSD Blogger. She's a best-selling, award-nominated author. She's the host of the program Changing Directions and the founder of HealMyPTSD.com. She's a former faculty member of the Clinical Developmental Institute for Timberline Knolls Residential Treatment Center. Michele is also a trauma survivor who struggled with PTSD stress disorder for over 25 years. Then she's launched her successful Healing Rampage program. Now, Michele has been 100% free of PTSD symptoms for almost a decade, and we're talking about her book, Heal Your PTSD. Well, Michele, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Justin, for having me, and I appreciate your focus in this area because it's so important, especially today, September 11th.
Totally. I agree. Well, tell me a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this niche.
I lived the niche. Mm-hmm. In 1981, I was just a 13-year-old kid living a very normal, very fine life. And I ended up with a run-of-the-mill infection. The doctor gave me a run-of-the-mill antibiotic. And what happened after that was anything but run-of-the-mill. It was undisclosed, unknown to us. I had an allergy to the medication. And so I ended up with toxic epidermal necrolysis syndrome, which is a fancy way of saying that the medication worked its way out of my body through the skin and turned me essentially into a full body burn victim. So over the period of a few weeks in a quarantine burn unit hospital room, I lost 100% of the first 2 layers of skin. And that could traumatize just about anybody.
Oh my gosh. All right. So we typically think of these post-traumatic stress disorders. We kind of associate them with war and battle, but it sounds like you came about this from a different angle.
Excuse me, that's such a great point because the media makes it seem like the only people who have PTSD are our veterans, and I highly respect them. I've worked with them. I work hard to help them. They are so important in our PTSD community, and yet they are a portion of the PTSD community. Actually speaking, 1 in 3 cancer survivors end up with post-traumatic stress disorder, 1 in 4 heart attack and stroke victims, domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, car accidents, natural disasters. Post-traumatic stress disorder can come from anything.
So looking at that, where's that line cross from just encountering a really crappy situation for it being a PTSD situation? How does that line get drawn?
I think that's a very personal line. Up to 70% of all U.S. adults will have some kind of major trauma in their lifetime, but only 20% will end up with post-traumatic stress disorder. And for those of us that do get stuck there, It's a combination of personality, history, childhood programming, the biology of trauma, how trauma affects your brain, the neurophysiological response that you have to trauma. So a lot of different factors come into play to create your post-trauma response. And for some people, that means PTSD. And for another, really the majority of people, that means moving through a post-trauma transition and then being free and moving on. But for those of us who get stuck, it's a variety of factors that hold us there.
Got it. And it's really interesting because you've kind of gone through that wounded healer type of journey where you were 13, you had this allergic reaction, you had this post-traumatic event. So you're 13, you lost your first 2 layers of skin via this allergic reaction. What happened next with you, and how did you deal with it?
It was incredibly hard. This is such a rare illness. Only 1 in 2 million people end up with it. None of my doctors had ever seen it.
Well, I'm looking at your pictures today. I mean, you seem like you must have made 100% full recovery.
You're so right. And I'm so lucky because not everybody looks that way. I was very fortunate. I had great care. My parents were amazing. Mm-hmm. And what happened to me really that destroyed me was more what happened afterward. You survive a trauma any way you can. Mm-hmm. And I had a near-death out-of-body experience and an enormous amount of pain. And when I came out of the hospital, the doctors told me, you won't survive this again. So you are living in a body that you have to be very careful with. And I thought, oh my God. And Dr. Day, think about it. When you were 13, what kind of coping mechanisms did you have for major trauma?
Wow. I mean, not much. I mean, I remember being 13, you didn't have the confidence, the self-awareness. You relied a lot on your parents. Yeah, that's a tough situation to be in.
You're so right. And so I came out of the hospital not really knowing how to cope and very unable to process. And all I wanted was to get as far away from that experience as possible. And so when I started exhibiting post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, which happened very, very soon after I was released from the hospital, nobody recognized them. It was the early 1980s. PTSD only became a diagnostic criteria that was recognized in 1980. This was 1981, and it was only being applied to the military at that time. Right. So the psychiatrist that my parents took me to said, oh, she's resilient. She's a kid. She'll bounce back. But I didn't. I descended into a place of anxiety and depression and mood swings and frequent rage and nightmares and insomnia, and for the next 24 years thought that was who I was. I thought some people are supposed to be crazy and I'm one of them.
Right. So basically you knew you were going through this PTSD event because of the lingering depression and anxiety and mood stuff that they just didn't quite go away after the experience. Is that kind of how you knew something else was deeper?
No, actually. I mean, I wasn't conscious enough to know that or mature enough. I really just thought this is who I am. I didn't understand that it was PTSD until I was so dysfunctional. I had lost my job. I was floundering in life. And I started looking at, okay, I need help. And when I started getting into the I need help process and researching the symptoms that I had, little by little, the literature led me to PTSD. And it was at that time that I actually took a self-test. We have on the healmyptsd.com website a self-test for PTSD. It's actually the one I took when I was in recovery. And then I took that to a trauma-trained professional and said, what is this? Yeah. And from there, I got my diagnosis and started recovery.
Got it. Well, we see with our troops today, a lot of the mainline therapies for PTSD out there, a lot of them stem around pharmaceuticals and SSRIs and such. So how did your approach to get better differ from a lot of the mainline therapeutic techniques?
It didn't, because there's no one way to heal PTSD, and it doesn't necessarily change depending on what your original trauma was. Because my original trauma was medical and related to a medication. I know you'll understand when I tell you I didn't want to have anything to do with pharmaceuticals because I was terrified. So I did it, hardcore, which was not easy. But I really think we over-prescribe medication for PTSD recovery. And I've worked with clients who, I actually, my very first client came to me. She'd been on 3 medications for 10 years, and her psychiatrist and psychologist had told her, you can't heal PTSD. You just have to learn to live with it, and we'll keep upping your medication. And that made her unable to do anything. So I think there's a place for pharmaceuticals, but that's at the extreme, and they're only to be used to allow you to be functional enough to do the work of recovery. And if you can avoid them, I and many other professionals really promote that you do, because getting off of those medications is a thing all by itself. It's not easy.
Right. Well, I know there are a lot of good techniques out there to help deal with stress. I know EMDR, or the eye movement desensitization techniques, EFT, or these various tapping techniques, also talk therapy. I also see a lot of patients that come in with PTSD, and we run adrenal testing, and their adrenals are shot. They're in total stage 3 adrenal fatigue, and they have a hard time managing, dealing with, and adapting to stress. So what techniques did you use? Also talk therapy too. What techniques did you use that found to be, the biggest support for you in healing?
I started, as many of us do, in talk therapy and cognitive behavior therapy, which I think is so important. It gives you a good foundation for learning how to consciously be aware of what's you're feeling and why, and to put words to the chaos that's in your head and share those words so it gets out of you and into the world, which allows you to reclaim a certain amount of control. So I started there. And then we used many of the things that you've referenced: EMDR, EFT, thought field therapy, TAP is acupressure technique, chiropractics. I would try anything. What I found in my recovery was all of those things that worked with the conscious mind and the energy processing were great, and they had their place, and I got functional. I could go back to work, and that was fantastic. The problem was I still had all of my symptoms. They were just modulated, and I was better able to manage them. And so I discovered later, just by trial and error, what I believe now is so important to understand in recovery, which is this. Your mind is divided into your conscious and your subconscious. Let's just say those two predominant ways. And your conscious mind is 12% of your brain. It's your short-term memory, your logic, your analysis, your reasoning. And your subconscious mind is 88% of your brain. It's all of your long-term memory. It remembers everything that's ever happened to you. It drives 100% of your behaviors based on the beliefs that you hold. So any recovery, to be successful and truly freeing, I believe, has to use 100% of your brain, not just the traditional, but also the alternative processes that access the subconscious mind, things like hypnosis, neuro-linguistic programming, those kind of processes that incorporate both sides of the mind.
So which techniques for you made the biggest difference in rewiring that subconscious?
Actually, hypnosis and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and so much did they impress me that I went on and got trained in them. And now I use them with all of my clients, and I see the benefits over and over. Partly, I think they're useful because you remain totally in control. I know that's not, what everybody thinks about hypnosis, but hypnosis is really just a way of altering your focus so that you can engage the subconscious mind. And we actually go in and out of hypnosis all the time. When we're watching a movie, when we're doing an activity, we don't realize how much time has gone by. That's an altered state of focus. That's hypnosis. So your brain is already doing that all the time. With hypnosis and hypnotherapy, we actually use the process to help engage the subconscious mind to talk to it in its language, which is a language of symbol and metaphor and story and suggestion. So you remain completely in control. You can accept or reject anything that a hypnotherapist says. But it's a gentle way to help the subconscious mind start reframing perspectives, beliefs, and events in a way that brings relief. So I love that, and I love neuro-linguistic programming because you don't have to be in an altered state. It uses language to literally change the structure of the neural pathways of the brain. So you put those two things together, and there are two very gentle ways of working, no matter what your comfort level is. Most people can find one or the other that is useful to them.
Yeah, I use NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and various hypnosis programs daily. I use a technology called Zen Frames, where I have these various NLP programs that involve hypnosis, and I wear these glasses that produce various wavelengths to the eyes, and I find that's very helpful. And I have lots of different programs that I do for motivation or for self-improvement. And I think NLP is profound, very phenomenal. How do you apply it? Like, let's say, can you just give the average person at home just a visualization of what NLP is?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. Neuro-linguistic programming speaks to the fact that your brain represents your world in three dominant ways: sight, sound, and feeling. And neuro-linguistic programming puts together neuro, how your brain represents the world, with language, the linguistic, and programming. And then it helps reprogram the brain. So for example, I'll give you an example from somebody I worked with last week. I have a client who, child sexual abuse survivor, and has a huge fear of bathtubs. So you can talk and talk and talk about your fear of bathtubs and why. I mean, she knows why she has a fear of bathtubs. She was abused in a bathtub, but that makes it incredibly hard for her to take a bath. So, and she likes bathing rather than showering, so she wants to be able to take a bath and be unafraid. And so what we do in NLP is, instead of talking and talking and talking about it, we take the feeling and the image that creates in the brain, and we literally start changing the image. So for example, when we have a fearful feeling, that creates an image of the brain. It can be totally realistic or abstract, it doesn't matter, but it creates an image in the brain, and then we can change. That image is usually in Technicolor. It's usually very big. It's usually very close. We can start changing those kinds of elements, which are called submodalities. So we can shrink that picture, change it to black and white, move it from in front of you to behind you. We change all the different ways that feeling is being represented in that picture. And by the time we're done with that process, you'd be amazed how the feeling shrinks and is eliminated, and how it doesn't come back, because we have literally rewired the way that scenario is existing in the brain.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do that exercise with my patients. Sometimes we'll take a really bad memory, and then we'll shrink it down. We'll blink it black and white. We'll put some circus music in the background. We'll zip it forward and backwards really fast, and it's like you're flattening these neurons. So when these neuro connections go to essentially fire again, they're not quite firing the same way, right?
Exactly. And the whole use it or lose it, neurons that fire together, wire together idea of neurology and how neurogenesis works and how neural pathways are strengthened or weakened. So when we put all of the science together with this really simple seeming process, it's amazing what can happen. It sounds like you're doing great work with it. I wish I'd known you during my PTSD recovery.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, I've seen a lot of practitioners myself, more just for human performance. I work with a couple of people that combine NLP with hypnosis and tapping and EFT. So we'll go into various NLP states, and where those emotions come up, we'll kind of tap on some of those points as we go through the NLP, visualization and such. So I've tried combining them, and I think it works great. Have you tried combining them at all?
I do. I use hypnosis and NLP together all the time.
Do you combine the tapping at all too?
I don't. I'm not trained in the tapping, so I haven't. But I can see that it absolutely would work.
Yeah, I've seen it work phenomenal. And I find that, a lot of your conventional psychologists, psychiatrists are way off. They're typically more just in the drug interventions, but most of the psychologists, they're just only working on the conscious mind, just the talking. And I feel like these type of therapies really get below the surface, like you said.
I think that's so true. And we should also add into this the somatic therapies, like somatic experiencing, tension and trauma releasing exercises, the things that really speak to how the body is holding the trauma and seeking to release it too. There's so many ways to approach the recovery process that are stronger and more to the point than talking about it.
Can you talk about some of those exercises? Like, is there something that our listeners could do right now if they're not driving or if they're in a good spot? Could they do an exercise?
Like an NLP exercise?
You just mentioned an exercise a minute ago.
Tension and trauma releasing exercises developed by David Berceli.
Okay.
I can tell you what he's told me because I've interviewed him. But to really do this, you would need to follow up and connect with him. I think it's traumaprevention.com, I think is his website. But he has an interesting story. He was administering aid in I think a Middle Eastern country and was very traumatized by the war that was going on. And he noticed that when he curled himself into a ball and then allowed his body to release, he was able to relieve some of the stress and the tension. And then he developed that into an entire modality that he teaches people so that they can help their body learn to tense and release in ways that relieve the trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Are you familiar with any of Amy Cuddy's work?
Yes. Power postures.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of her work and how posture and how you hold your body is important to recovery and your emotion and your subconscious?
Absolutely, definitely. And this is one of the main points that we make that I make in Heal Your PTSD. The book is all about chunking down recovery to find the little things that work for you. And power posture is a great example of that. Because power posture, literally, we know that testosterone reduces cortisol. When we're in a high stress state like PTSD, your cortisol is usually elevated. So anytime that we want to make that shift from powerless to powerful, which is at the base of PTSD recovery, we learn to do that on a daily basis. Repetition is how the brain learns. So the more often you can repeat a process to teach the brain how you want it to be, the more often you will be successful. And power posture is a great way to do that, because what Amy Cuddy discovered is that there are just certain postures when you put your body into that posture, it immediately increases your testosterone, so you drop your cortisol level, and can put your body into a frame of feeling so grounded and secure that it's, we have that mind-body loop. When your body feels that kind of grounding and security, it sends that message to your brain that then sends that message back to your body, and you can immediately shift out of a feeling of fear and into a sense of security. So Amy Cuddy particularly promotes putting your feet up on the desk with your hands behind your head, and it's a very relaxed looking pose. That's her favorite. I really love sitting in a chair, feet flat on the floor, hands palm down on your thighs, and then really rolling your shoulders back, strengthening and aligning your spine and allowing your hips to pop forward so you've got that alignment, and then sitting like that, because you can't always on a bus when you start to have a panic attack say to everybody, move over please, excuse me, I got to put my feet up and my hands behind my head. But this other power position helps you feel grounded and allows you to feel completely connected.
Yeah, I love that. I know she did the study where she did the power pose, where it's kind of like it's like if you're in the Rocky movie and Rocky gets to the top of the steps and he puts his arms above his head and he just kind of puts his arms out and really extends that spine. I think she saw a significant, like a 20% reduction in cortisol while a 20% increase in testosterone. So we can shift our hormones by just our posture. And I deal a lot with hormones and gut stuff in functional medicine, and I do a lot of these salivary tests that measure hormones. I was just fascinated to see she was doing these same tests and seeing hormones change with just posture.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are so many ways we can change our body chemistry in under 2 minutes. For example, breath work does the same thing, not the same cortisol, I'm not saying that, but in under 2 minutes, you can change your whole chemical makeup just by doing breath work. So I think the power of the body, as you know so much from your work, is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Can you
and
talk
we just
about
have to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the breath work that you do with your patients or that you recommend in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I love more than anything square breathing. It was, and I think I love it because personally it helped me so much, but I love it too because I speak a lot nationally about post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma and recovery. And I love to do this exercise in the room where I ask everyone to rate their stress on a scale of 1 to 10. And then we do a group breathing exercise of square breathing and just 2 minutes. And afterward, you can feel the entire energy of the room just come down. And when everyone rates their feeling of stress afterward, they're so amazed. It's just been 2 minutes and it's breath work. So my favorite breathing exercise is square breathing, which is literally a 4-4-4 count, 4-4-4-4. So it's 4 sides of the square. So you breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, out for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts. Now that's what I learned. That was back in the late 90s. What we know since then is that things seem to work even better if you have a longer exhale than you have an inhale. And I interviewed a PTSD breathwork expert who suggested that the optimal number of breaths per minute is 5, and that the optimal number for breathing count is 4-4-6-2. That was from all the research that she had done. And so that's breathing in for a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, releasing for a count of 6, holding for a count of 2, and then starting over. And I always like to remind people that the first time that you do this exercise, and maybe the second time and the third time, the first 3 to 5 rounds of the breathing, you might want to jump out of your skin, and that's okay. Because it's very hard as a survivor to sit still, to trust, to be okay just with your breath. That's okay. If you will allow yourself to embrace the resistance, acknowledge, accept it, validate it, and stick with the process of breathing, after about the 5th round, you will start to notice everything changes. If you can get to 10 rounds, it will be so much easier.
Got it. 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out, 2 hold.
Yes.
Great. Now, how do you incorporate meditation?
Oh, I do. One of the first things that I did in my own recovery, my therapist taught me transcendental meditation, and that was 1998. And I still do it today because the benefits, I'm symptom-free. I have been for almost a decade, but I love transcendental meditation. It feels good. It's energizing. It improves your cognitive abilities. It focuses your brain. It reduces stress. So I developed a practice right away after a little bit of initial resistance because, again, no survivor wants to sit still and be quiet. So I had a little bit of a resistance that I had to work through. But when I did, within a month, I was already seeing the benefits. I was better able to handle change, better able to handle stress, and starting to feel a little more calm throughout the day. So I teach for all of my clients that feel comfortable. I teach that to them so that they can incorporate that in their own recovery process. And I think all the things that we're talking about are so beneficial, Dr. J. I think the most important thing to remember is that everybody is so unique and individual that again and again we have to come back to, you have to try something. If it resonates with you, do it again. If it doesn't, find something else, because so many times I see people forced into recovery processes that are making them worse when it's just it was the wrong recovery process for them. And so it's important to sort of recognize your own feedback and say, okay, I've tried this 3 times and I feel significantly worse each time. I need something else.
Do you think like NLP or the hypnosis and such, would that ever not be the right path for someone to heal?
Well, you and I have a deep understanding of hypnosis and NLP, and we see the results. But from an ideological standpoint, I would always say that there's going to be someone that doesn't like it. and someone for whom it doesn't work, because just statistically speaking, I think that would be the case. I have not met that person yet.
Okay.
But that just really has a lot to do with where you are in your recovery and how you're managing it. Sometimes we can try something at one point in our recovery and hate it, it doesn't work. And 6 months or 2 years later, it's exactly the thing we needed. But we just had a little more work to do to get to that place where it was beneficial.
So if you encounter that patient, how would you shift gears away from, your bread and butter, NLP and hypnosis? How would you shift gears?
Well, I'm also trained as a coach, so there's a lot we can do with coaching. And in fact, Heal Your PTSD is a book all about coaching. It's all about figuring out how do we chunk down the process of recovery to create daily healing actions and develop a process that feels comfortable for each individual person. One of the things that I worked really hard in Heal Your PTSD to do is to customize it so that everyone can create their own personal process. So right away I would switch to coaching, and a lot of times other processes like hypnosis and NLP will work when you're farther along in the cognitive conscious realm. So when you get to a place where you trust yourself more, or you believe in what you're doing, or you feel less afraid, then you can try hypnosis or NLP again and see how it goes. I particularly in those instances stick with NLP because there's less fear related to it. You don't have to close your eyes, don't have to be in an altered state. There's so much we can do that is less fear producing, quote unquote, than hypnosis where you have to close your eyes. Some of my clients don't want to close their eyes. That's frightening for them. So we steer away from those. If in the end someone really doesn't want to use hypnosis or NLP and we've gone as far as we can go with coaching, they really need another modality, then I bring in a colleague and say, okay, well, my colleague is trained in this. So if that resonates with you, let's try that. And I'll bring in a colleague because, you never want to stand in the way of someone's recovery if they can't do it the way you're trained. Find somebody who's trained a different way.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Going back to your transcendental meditation, how does that look? Like, how's that different compared to your conventional, run-of-the-mill meditation? Like, how does that, if someone wants to do it right now, how does that apply?
Right. Well, there are so many different ways to meditate. So I'll explain the answer to that by sharing the other ways. Meditation is really just a way to focus your brain. So we can do that by literally just sitting still and focusing on our breathing, how the breath moves in and out. We can focus on the flame of a candle or another image, a spot on the wall. For anyone who's into yoga, you have a drishti when you're doing balancing processes. You focus on one spot on the wall. We can even do that with sound, just by listening to a sound. And I think it's important to approach the idea of meditation by understanding there are many ways to do this. Again, for survivors who don't want to close their eyes, transcendental meditation, purely speaking, might not feel comfortable because you don't want to close your eyes to meditate, and you don't have to. So what I love about TM is I was happy to close my eyes, and I needed a focus for my brain. My brain would jump all over the place with all kinds of anxiety when I tried to meditate. I couldn't just focus on my breath. It didn't work. My brain was all over the place with all the reasons we shouldn't be doing that. So for me, TM was really useful because it, you choose a word and you just focus on the word. And for me, I chose the word peace. I don't even remember why I chose that, but in looking back, it was what I most wanted. And so I held that word in my consciousness, in my closed eyes. I could see the word, and I just would stay focused on the word, repeating it over and over to myself so that my brain was able to just chill out, calm down. It had a focus. It had a little job to do. It was supposed to focus on this word. And that allowed me to slip into a very deep state of meditation for an hour. So it was very useful for me, especially for someone who has insomnia, which I did. You, I'm sure, know this, Dr. J, but 1 hour of meditation is like 2 hours of REM sleep.
Yeah.
So the benefits of TM or any meditation are enormous and very vast.
So when you're doing this meditation, you're putting your visualization on the word peace. And are you doing that same breath pattern you talked about, the 4-4-6-2?
No, actually, I don't. I do a lot of big cleansing breaths and allow myself to sort of hum. You know,
Yep.
your body resonates.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like 5 really, I breathe in as far as I can and then
Yep.
release as far as I can, allowing
Yep.
the breath to hum out. And then I just let myself go into regular breathing, because I think it would be hard to focus on a word and count the breath at the same time. So I just focus on the word and let the breathing take care of itself so that my mind can just shut down.
Got it. So 5 big, really deep breaths to start. You're focused on that word or that image, and then you're just breathing regularly as you keep that focus.
Right. And those big, deep breaths really slow, like really slowly in and really slowly out, because what you're doing is sending a message to your body, slow down. And what we said before comes into play here. The message that your body picks up, it relays to your mind. So when you get your body into this slow rhythmic breathing, it sends a message to your mind, slow down. And that is the beginning of creating a meditative state.
And these breaths are coming from the diaphragm, right? The belly's distending. You're not breathing from the chest. These are all big belly breaths, right?
Yes, definitely.
Great. Awesome. I know John Kabat-Zinn does a lot on the transcendental meditation. Is he a good resource?
Absolutely. He's a great resource for so many things. I love his work.
Awesome. Well, going back in time for you, it was 1983, 84 where this all happened. When did you feel like you hit a full recovery?
My original trauma was 1981, so
81.
You're right. By 83 or 84, I was a mess. And then my full recovery was around 2007. So it was a long time coming, almost 30 years, 26 years of struggling and then attempting to heal and failing at it. I hate that word. Yeah. But that's the word that we always mostly comes to mind. But that's the way recovery goes. You make some successes, you have some gains, and then something happens and you think you've been set back. But one of the points that I make in Heal Your PTSD, we have a whole section on what to do to bust through blocks. And the point really is that just because you feel like you've gone back, the operative word there is feeling. It's a feeling that you've gone back, but you can't go back. That's one of the biggest problems with trauma is you can't go back to who you were before. Yeah. You can only go forward. So it's not like then you get into recovery and, suddenly you can go back to who you were 3 years ago, where you were much worse. You can't, because you've come so far since then. And I'm working with a client now, and he every time he hits that wall, and there are many, he says, I'm right back to where I was last year. And I said, no, you're not. Tell me the differences between how you're able to function today and how you were a year ago. And he's full of the differences. So it's just a matter of being able to access a thought process that helps you reclaim your permanency in the present moment and figure out where you go from there.
Got it. I know you used that word failing to start. I have a really great mnemonic device for failing. It's find an important lesson, invite needed growth.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I like it too. And, I notice in your time frame, 81 to 2007, that's a long time. And I imagine you just didn't encounter the tools you needed until later on in your healing journey. Is that what the delay was?
I think a part of the delay was a lack of knowledge and awareness about post-traumatic stress disorder. 1981, nobody was looking at a civilian kid with medical trauma and diagnosing those symptoms. I think another problem was there was no Google, so it wasn't like my parents, who were very active in trying to help me. There was no Google, let's get online and put in her symptoms and see what comes up. I think another problem is that while I love the psychologist that taught me TM, he had no clue about PTSD. So I
Right.
spent 8 years in and out of therapy with him, getting a little bit better, and then really, really taking a nosedive off the face of the planet. And he had no clue what was really wrong. So I think part of it is you have to be working with the right person. I didn't know there was such a thing as a trauma-trained therapist until I was really, really sick, mentally and physically, and I started doing my own research. And all of a sudden, I started realizing I'm working with the wrong person. He was awesome. I loved him, but he was not equipped to help me. So there's that. And then there's also just the time frame of figuring out what's going to work with you and trying things and having the successes that you do and then the unexpected outcomes that make you say, okay, I need to do this a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So my journey is by no means unique. There are other people who go 30 years without the proper diagnosis, but there are other people who heal in 6 months, so it's important to recognize both sides of the spectrum so that nobody thinks, gosh, if it took her that long, it's going to take me that long, because that's not the case.
So if you encountered yourself now as a practitioner back in 1981, how long do you think it would take you to get over this?
Well, two factors I think come into play. Number one, the strengths of the practitioner, and so I would say if I was working with me, I'd be really, really well on my way.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, though, we as survivors have to be ready and willing to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot that goes into the recovery process that is frightening and painful and challenging. And if we're not ready to do that, then nobody can help us because we're not ready to be helped. And so there is that aspect of it too. Recovery from PTSD changes everything. PTSD becomes a lifestyle, and recovery and healing become a lifestyle, but they're two totally polar opposite lifestyles. PTSD is all about your safety and your control and trying to maintain those two things. Healing and recovery is a lifestyle of understanding you don't have the ability to constantly be safe and control. Your job is to learn to live in a world with as much strength and certainty and power as you can despite those things. And recovery asks you to give up all of the coping mechanisms you've put in place to ensure your survival. The insomnia, the hypervigilance, the mood swings, all of those things we do to maintain the status quo, to keep us safe. Now, recovery is asking you to drop all of that because those are actually the things making you worse. And so you have to be prepared for that place of uncertainty and not knowing what you're doing and not knowing who you're going to become. And figuring that out and having an attitude in Heal Your PTSD, I write about it as an attitude of being an adventurer and an explorer because you are in uncharted territory. What are you going to do there? And that's really the point of having these strategies so that on any day, depending on how you feel in any day, you can open Heal Your PTSD and find a strategy that will work for you for that day. Because every day is different, and that's really the challenge, is to figure out how to work through each day, adding incrementally to your healing process along the way.
Yeah, and you have a lot of these strategies in the book as well, too. That's great. And when you say ready, being ready, do you mean like you're just admitting there's a problem and something needs to be addressed? Is that what you mean by ready?
I mean, it starts there. For the longest time, Dr. J, every time my parents, or particularly my mother, would say, you need help. This is not right the way you are. And she didn't mean that unkind. She meant you're in so much pain. This isn't right. We can fix this. And I kept screaming and yelling at her, there is nothing wrong with me. You're the problem. If you would leave me alone, I'd be just fine. So first you have to admit, yes, the problem is me.
Yeah. And
then you have to be willing to do the work. The work is painful and it is frightening. And it is... there are a lot of fears that go along with PTSD recovery.
What was the hardest thing for you?
Yeah, my biggest one was I was afraid that the recovery process itself would make me clinically insane. I was so afraid that my mind would not be able to handle what I was being asked to do and the influx of memory and the flood of intense emotion. I thought I would literally have to be straitjacketed and put into a padded cell. So I resisted for at least 17 years, I resisted the idea that I needed help because I was frightened to get help. And then once I got into recovery, there were a lot of times that I quit because I just couldn't handle how awful it felt. I think really living with PTSD and going through the recovery process is worse than the original trauma itself because you're so much more conscious during the living and recovery process. During a trauma, your survival mechanisms take over and you just do what you have to do. But so it's for me, and I see this for a lot of people, and I hear this from a lot of the survivors who connect with me, that fear of recovery is one of the biggest blocks to recovery. So you really, I recommend for everyone, deal with the fear first. You will not make any recovery gains until you face the fear of recovery and put that out of the way, because otherwise it's just going to keep popping up and distracting you.
And what would be the big piece of advice that you would give to someone that may subconsciously be afraid of recovering? What's that piece that you would give them to overstep that?
If they're subconsciously afraid, meaning they are not aware of their fear?
Yeah, like let's say there's some type of hidden block that's preventing them from saying, hey, I have a problem and I need to fix this. What's that first step that you could encourage them to take to help overcome that?
Oh, excellent. I would use one of my favorite NLP techniques, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is future pacing. Like, let's look out into the future. What's your future going to look like if things stay as they are now?
Yeah.
And once you start doing that, people can start to see the difference between how life can be and how it is now. And they are usually able to pop up and say, but if I do that, and the minute you have the but, you've got the problem. Because the but if I do that is usually what the underlying fear is. Usually it's losing something, in terms of their current relationships. I have one client now who literally the thing that is stalling his recovery is that his girlfriend doesn't like that he feels better. So for a long time, he wasn't aware of that. And then once you become aware of what that underlying thing is, whether it's somebody else that's going to change, how you will change, how your life will be different, a lot of times we fear feeling better. And that's a very relevant fear, but it's usually subconscious. It's not something we recognize until we say, well, if I'm that okay. Oh, this is a great example because this exact process worked with one of my clients. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And we were working through this exact process. And she said, well, if I'm that okay, then my family, her extended family who had abused her, they're going to come after me. And all of a sudden, the subconscious fear of recovery was there in the spotlight. She was really afraid that if she felt better, her family would descend upon her. Whereas right now, if she stayed in bed, didn't bathe, didn't eat, and watched TV all day, nobody was bothering her. So from that little exercise, we could pop out, here's the underlying fear, and we suspended all work on recovery and started working on how are we going to make her safe so that recovery was possible.
Right. And I could see it also being scary. You get a lot of attention when you're sick. You get more doctors coming around you. You get more nurses. You get more sympathy from friends and family. And then you also get excuses. If you aren't successful in your life or if you aren't doing the things that maybe you wanted to be doing when you were younger and set your goals out, well, you have an excuse. So it could be scary to now lose that excuse, right?
Absolutely. That's a great point.
So after everyone's listened to this last 45 minutes or so, what would you say are like the big 3 take-homes? Like, hey, if you just missed everything, but you're tuning into these three little take-homes, what are the 3 take-homes you'd give to our listeners?
I would say, number 1, don't listen to the naysayers. PTSD can be healed. It absolutely can. Every single one of us has enormous healing potential. The goal is learning to access it, and that's your job. So I'm not saying everyone will heal because not everyone wants to go through the process of recovery. Right. But we all start from that level playing ground of the possibility is out there for you. So stop listening to anyone who thinks it's impossible and turn yourself in a different direction and move toward the people who know it is and are doing it. So number 1, recovery is possible. Right. Number 2, recovery happens through two things: making choices and taking actions. Those are the two fundamental elements for every recovery. It doesn't matter what your trauma is. It doesn't matter what modality you're using. If you implement choices and actions on a daily basis that are designed to move you forward, you will start seeing gains. And the last thing I would say is to always stay in touch with your hope, because there are going to be dark moments that challenge it. And I think the best way to stay in touch with a sense of hope is, number one, to start with an openness to it. When I started my recovery, I didn't know that I was going to get to where I am today, which is 100% free of symptoms for almost a decade, despite an enormous triggering event 2 years ago. So I didn't know this is where I was going to be. I just hoped that I would get there. And number two, we have to feed hope. It's like a little plant. It needs to be tended to. It needs to grow. And for that, I really recommend, and I do this with all of my clients, we need those life-affirming experiences that make us feel it's good to be alive. I feel okay. I even feel happy about being alive. For me, that came in the scenario of joy. I decided I needed to feel joy every day, even if it was that just 30 minutes. I decided I needed that sense of joy. 30 seconds even would be great. So I literally developed a program for myself. I knew when I dance, I feel good, I feel joyful, I feel free. And I literally signed up for a dance class every single day of the week for months on end, just to help the brain have that repetitive process of, this feels good. And for me, that allowed me to feel hope. Oh, I can feel good for this amount of time. Maybe I could feel good for twice that amount of time one day. And by repetitively training the brain, this feels good, we can do this, you start to develop a sense of belief that deepens, and ultimately more courage. So for all of my clients, I ask them, find that thing that it feels good to do. So the client that I just told you was worried about her family if she healed. She loved to ride her Harley on the back roads of this very rural town that she lived in. I have another client who his thing is jet skiing, and he'll just go out for a couple of hours just to have that connection with a part of ourselves that feels good to be alive. So I'd say those three things are super important, as they create a base for recovery. And then from there, you build on it in whatever way is personal to you.
That's great. Are you still seeing clients? Are you seeing clients virtually as well?
I do. I work with people from around the world via Skype and phone. And the recovery process to me is ongoing all the time. Even when you're done, your job then is to continue living your life the way you've designed and created your recovery process. That is, with intention and consciousness and a desire to feel good. And so from there, we can go anywhere in creating a life and who we want to be that feels good and is meaningful and substantial and successful.
Great. And what's the best way for the listeners to get a hold of you?
HealMyPTSD.com. You can have access there not only to me, but to our free Heal My PTSD forum. We have over 100 podcasts of interviews with healing professionals and survivors, all of whom talk about how to heal and the results that they're seeing. And also Heal Your PTSD, Dynamic Strategies That Work, and my other books are available there. Plus, our free webinar training series on the science behind your symptoms. So it's like a virtual PTSD party on the HealMyPTSD.com site.
Great. Are there any other social media avenues that listeners can find yet?
Absolutely. Twitter and Facebook. The links are on the HealMyPTSD.com site as well.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate your story, Michele, the fact that you've gone through it, you've healed, you tried lots of different strategies. I definitely am a big fan of some of these strategies. And before we even chatted today, I knew about these strategies before, and it's great that we were so in sync. I really appreciate that. And it's, you walking the journey of the wounded healer, and you bring so much more to your patients because you walk that journey.
Thank you so much, Dr. J. I appreciate that. And thank you for your interest in all of this today.
Thanks, Michele, for coming on the show.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.